Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Pick and Post show, the second edition of the Pick and Post show for this week. We'll be covering the Legends stage of the PGL Antwerp Major. We've already been through the challenges, and most of our picks have definitely fallen through since that point. I'm joined by another great panel of folks, some names that you will recognize from the last episode, in Trav and Scriv. Welcome back, gentlemen. Good to have you on again.
Yeah, a pleasure to be here again, and I'm feeling pretty good about this one. Let's just say that.
You have every reason to feel good based on what we're going to get into a little bit. We have upgraded as well. Retro decided that he wanted to ditch the show this time. He decided to sell out because he needed the money to cast, and so we've got a newer element to the show. Yumi joining us. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence.
Is this an upgrade or is this a down? I mean, if he's working and I'm just a side guy. Like, what the hell?
Well, personally, anyone who comes on this show is an upgrade anyway, so I understand at least one of us is going to be not here for the final show edition of the show, so I'll let you stir on that one for a little bit. So anyway, it's the Pick and Post show. We're doing our pick'ems, we're talking about pick'ems, we're talking about everything to do with the major itself, and once again, as is last time, I asked everyone to submit their pick'em predictions, and we can go through those sort of over the course of the show. So let's get started, of course, by showing you exactly how we did during the Legend stage, and for the most part, you'll very quickly understand the answer is not good at all. So here's my picks. I had a bit of a cry on social media because I missed out by one. I needed G2 to win on the last day. They bottled it, and so they won't be allowing me my diamond trophy this time around. Similar story for Yumi as well, because you also only got 4, missing out your 3-0 and 0-3s. We all kind of went down similar lines with a lot of these picks overall. You only got FaZe, Na'Vi, Ents, and Furia through. Trav was out on the 4th round because he missed the boat on, it seems like everybody, it felt like. So it sucks to be you on that particular front. The only person who's still in for the Diamond Trophy is, in fact, our boy Scriv, who, it's funny because we were BMing him so much last week about him picking Complexity in the Challengers stage, and now here he is, the only person still standing with 5 to his name. Still missed out the 3-0 and 0-3, and also missed out on G2 and Vitality. But you've got Ents, you've got Heroic, you've got Furia, Na'Vi, and FaZe. So you're pretty sorted, mate.
Just about. It was quite nice. I went to sleep soundly, a couple of days ago, knowing that the matchups had worked out for me and whatever happened. I know a lot of people, especially, were on that G2 Furia game. Well, I had them both, so we're all good. And in all fairness, if people are tracking from the last show, I did a little bit of tweaking towards the end. I did have FaZe 3-0 originally, believing in, but then of course, if they go through, but it's not 3-0, you don't get the point. So I was much more confident in the fact that they were going to go through. And Trav kind of convinced me a little bit. He said that the 3-0, you could maybe use that as like a sort of middling team that's not necessarily the best at the tournament right now, but there's potential for them to upset the apple cart a little bit. And, that's definitely what happened. But yeah, so it's nice. I just about got there, which is I think the case for most people that made it through, actually.
Yeah. I mean, look, like, you definitely had the right call by switching FaZe out at the very last second, because that probably might have been the thing that saved your pick'em themselves here. Yumi and myself and Trav, obviously, we didn't do all that well. We definitely had the wrong picks in the wrong places. Yumi, I know that you were a little bit miffed with how your whole pick'em went down, so go on.
I mean, listen, man, I put Heroic 3-0 because, I thought they were a middling team as well, and they just barely scraped through. Like, if only Vitality had won, then, I'd be fine. I'd be sitting pretty. I'd be in the exact same position because I also had Furia and G2 both going through. So one of them had to give. But yeah, I don't know, man. The Danish French squad, whatever you would even quantify them as these days, just so many weird. That team is weird right now. I don't know. They're so hit and miss.
Well, just to quantify for everyone at home, for those of you that might have ended up missing the major, for all 2 of you that was living under a rock so far in Counter-Strike, we'll just sort of bring up the results and demonstrate exactly what we did see over the course of the Legend stage. Of course, Spirit and Na'Vi were the 2 teams to make it through in 3-0, which at least one of those teams is Ye God. The other squads that made it, 0 and 3 was Liquid and Bad News Eagles. We'll talk about those guys in a little bit. Ents, NIP, FaZe, Copenhagen Flames, Heroic, and Furia are the other squads that also made it through to the champion stage. stage. Last week we were talking about our big seven, and the teams that we heavily expected, we all sort of picked in to sort of make it into that champion stage. And really, guys, only 4 of them made it through. We missed out on G2, Cloud9, and Vitality. All those guys didn't really get their chance to hit the mark here. And we did have some sort of explanations and some concerns about at least 2 of those squads. The big standout name to me that really missed the mark in this Legend stage has got to be G2, because I don't think anyone really expected them to lose out here, right?
No. Yeah. No, I mean, I think everybody had them as a shoe-in to make it even to, like, probably the semifinals, finals even. So it is mental to think that after upgrading the roster, quote unquote upgrading, you know, they've got a proper IGL now, they've got a proper AWPer now. You don't have to have all these role swaps, and like mercenary players are just gonna fill whatever roles, and they somehow still not gone through. It's strange to think that the roster on paper looks better this time over for this major than they did at Stockholm.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we mentioned last week with the whole issues in terms of like just seeing what they did on LAN, especially at Katowice, for example, and how well they looked. Like even m0NESY, for example, was one of the guys that like we kind of were still sort of feeling out the idea of like him being a gamble for the G2 side, but him performing in the way that he has, we thought he was going to blow it out of the water in this major, and it feels like to me that didn't really happen the way that it wanted to. Like m0NESY still looked okay, but I feel like that one of the common themes this major is the veterans sort of testing the young guns and beating them out here, and I feel like G2 might fall into that category, boys.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just looking at how G2 played in general, I feel like, especially on their T sides, they relied on star power more than any other team at the event. For me, I feel like they sort of think, okay, well, we've got Nico, oh, we've got m0NESY, we've got Hunter, and that's enough to get us through. But as we so rightly saw, that's just not the case these days. You have to have, while obviously they've got a really good IGL and Alexi, there were just so many situations where I felt like not necessarily them going one by one as such and not being cohesive. It's just that you could tell a round or a strategy lies on one of them hitting the shots, right? I mean, obviously that's an obvious thing to say, it's just how it is usually. But yeah, as I said myself on Twitter, I honestly believe that if this G2 was given a chance with m0NESY and Nexa rather than Alexi, no matter how much I love Alexi, I honestly think a Nexa G2 would have made champion stage for me.
Yeah, I can kind of agree. I think Alexi is definitely a big change. And then also it has been a little bit weird, hasn't it? Like, trying to get some of those formation tournaments, as it were, like Pro League and whatnot, they were missing pieces. So I think they're still not, even to themselves, sort of like fully proven and fully like, okay, we've got some good reps in with the entire new squad and coach and, IGL, everyone being in the server and everything. But I don't know. I mean, another kind of aspect is like definitely last major out, and it feels like maybe in a couple of the more recent tournaments as well, Nico's numbers have not been as insane. They've still been good.
Yeah.
That last series from him was a little bit dodgy, but like he's human at the end of the day. But they've not been like as crazy as they have in the past, and I think that that's maybe something that they're sort of struggling with a little bit. There was definitely at the last major, especially, there was a little bit of that angle of like, it was the whole joke where it was like Kovac go kill kind of thing, and they maybe don't have that angle as reliably at the moment. Not sure if it's going to be any more, but at the moment, definitely it seems, and maybe that is because Alexi, a little bit more of a firm hand, comes in and is not going to allow Nico to just sort of ignore or go and do his own thing within a round.
Yeah, that's like actually like fully on board with the theory I have about G2, because I think if you looked at the old G2 and like how Nico was kind of pulling resources, he'd pull players out of positions to get aggressive middle on Mirage, or he'd, if he wanted to get some information on one side of the map, it would almost be like an instinctive thing. I almost feel like he's holding back, and I wonder if that's just him and the discussion that he's had with Alexi about like buying into the Alexi B launcher or the Alexi B system. And I actually agree with Trav to a certain extent. Like Nexa would have been far more freeing in that respect. I think there's a little bit more faith in that area. But there's a lot of questions about whether Alexi B is this sort of go-to in-game leader, because they have actually like good set pieces at this event. Like you could see G2 set up in really good ways to win rounds, and then like almost the positions you'd expect players to really thrive in just always fell off. And that almost feels like a comfort thing, and whether or not they can actually implement what Alexi B has planned or not. Like this guy has incredible micro, and he says he doesn't need to micro this team as much. But if that's his main strength and he's not doing it on this team, then why is he there in the first place? To a certain degree, like you have to actually buy into that idea if you're the remaining players.
Yeah, and I do feel like that's sort of like an avenue which I never really thought of myself personally. Like the idea of maybe if they had Nexa, then this team would have worked a little bit better than what it is right now. Like the idea of looking at like the comparisons of where Nexa's career and Alexi's career has sort of gone since that whole trade off had went was always like a bit of a storyline I personally was following. But to me, it does feel like given how this major had went and given how the G2 side has sort of fallen down since the Katowice run, it does feel to me like there is some sort of deeper rooted issue, because you take a look at those numbers again from m0NESY, for example, and he's been popping off in a similar sort of way. It isn't quite Kovac go kill anymore. He's been taking over the server quite a lot, and it feels like things just didn't quite come together in the way that many people had expected it to do. And I do feel like there was a level of hype surrounding this team just because of the fact that they have guys like m0NESY and NiKo involved. It's part of the reason why I think we all picked them, because they have looked so good as those individual elements. But if those individual elements don't come together, then what do G2 really make of? And that could be a bit more of a long-term concern, because if that's going to be a problem going forward, then we could be seeing more performances like we had at Pro League, for example, where G2 dipped out in the in the group stage. So in a similar sort of trend to what we've been talking about with a lot of these teams that have fallen apart during the course of this major, like is that like something we have to look at going forward? Like not necessarily an IGL change, but some sort of like stylistic change in the G2 side.
Yeah, I mean,
no takers.
Yeah, it's a hard.
That's kind of a
That's
loaded
tough
question.
though. That's tough. I just don't think you have any. I don't think you have any. I think if you're Carlos, we know how crazy the man is, and we'll just like he'll pluck players from anywhere. But I just don't think I don't think necessarily you can feel justified changing anything, whether that's personnel wise or stylistically. Yet, I don't know. They feel so rough around the edges for a team, especially that's made Kato finals. Like. And how close were they to winning that? I mean, like every map was basically overtime. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem right to change anything drastically. We've seen some teams take a really long time to gel together, and maybe that Kato finals was just a product of everyone performing to a really high level. And when they don't all perform to a really high level, or at least the level that their roles dictate they should, then we see the results like Pro League and this major, for example. I mean, I think that if you were to change anything, it wouldn't be the right way to go. And if you give a team like this more time, things can gel. And this is a team that can win with their B and C game rather than only their A game, if you get what I mean. So, I don't know.
What about Valda for Jax?
We're talking a lot about Valde moving about recently.
Would
haven't
Valda
we?
play those roles? Would Valda play Jack's roles?
Like, and the intangibles as well, right? But I mean, the school of NiKo, like, get some bigger numbers. That might be an angle that they take. I don't know. I'm just trying to find, because the other one is like Yukindar at the moment that seems Umnanarit, but I feel like that would be a little too crazy. You know what I mean? There'd be. It's like FaZe a little bit on steroids, and you talk about the roles and all that kind of stuff. It just really, but you never know. You never know. They might just do it, because again, there's a lot of aggressive elements, let's say, when it comes to decision making within the G2 camp. So, those are kind of the only two moves, and it just felt like when I was thinking it over in my head, it just felt like Valde was maybe a little bit more tame and not, as wild, let's say.
I think the angle that I have for G2 is that they just need to prioritize having Nuke in their veto. Throughout this entire stage, they didn't play it once. They played Furia and Outsiders in best of threes. Outsiders ban it, and Furia, it's a map that they like quite a lot, but it's a weird sort of you're not in a great spot because it's also one of the maps that Monacy didn't play a lot when he was on the academy system, so he's had to like learn how to put himself in the right spots to succeed. But it's a great map usually for Alexi B primarily, especially as he's not exactly a high fragging in-game leader. To have a map that you know that you can at least contribute in a pretty major way, and Nico as well. Like these guys are great on that map, and to have your sort of star AWPer not have the biggest strength on this exact same map might actually be a reason why they sort of float it a lot but don't actually pick it in series. I'd love to see them play that map a little bit more frequently, but it might just be that they just don't feel like they've had enough time to like actually fully implement every single piece to the equation. So I don't even know that they're I kind of stand by the idea that they just stick with this roster for a little bit, see how the second major goes in this year, and just build from there. But if the second major they don't make the playoffs as well, then yeah, roster moves have to happen.
I would say that it wouldn't surprise me if we saw some big ball play by Carlos again, because we, as you mentioned, we know what he's like, right? Like we know that if there's a good chance he's probably mulling over some stupid sort of move in the back of his head, and knowing that Yakindar wants to go, for example, just as a for instance, right? Like hitting that entry frag roll by replacing someone like Jax for Yakindar, on paper it would make sense because it is roll for roll, but I also, as you mentioned, do feel like it is probably a case that elements do need to come together in that sort of sense. I think one of the things we're talking about with Vitality, for example, was how long do we want to give a team like G2 before we sort of look towards that? You mentioned the majors, obviously. The second major is going to take a very long time to get there, and you think about all the other events that we've got coming up in Dallas, another edition of Pro League, Blast might see G2 in that as well. So like, there's a lot of opportunities in which G2 can prove themselves again. I feel like we need to see another good run like a Katowice to really show that this team can do it for a second time, because if they can't do it for a second time, then, well, I think there is indeed change on the horizon, boys. I think we can all agree on that front. Do we feel like Jax is the most likely player to get moved about, or is there other sort of options for them?
I mean, given the history of a guy like Nico and probably the support that he has in the team, at least from individuals, like, it would make sense there. And it does seem, given what we've heard in the past, that he does have a fair amount of influence with, the management and stuff like that. So usually, again, we don't really know, because obviously there's sort of like the role-playing angle and then the intangible angle, which is obviously the one that we can't really see on the server. So I don't know, but usually that would be the move. There is kind of the possibility as well that they've tried this new style Alexi B, much more hands-on, work for a bit. There's always that old, we've not heard it for many years, but it used to be a very common like thread with new moves and a decent performance. There's always the honeymoon period, right? So you never know, that might have had an effect. So yeah, it's probably either like Alexi, which would maybe be a lot further down the line. I think they still need to give that a lot more time, or Jax would just sort of be the obvious, like, make numbers better, is kind of, and like I say, I think Nico has been a fan of that kind of idea in the past.
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't. Thing is, like, if Nico's going to continue along the path of being obsessed with having high numbers, then does that win you games? Not necessarily. Like, at the end of the day,
Worked the last
do.
major.
Yeah, well, true. Yeah, but I just think that if you replace Jax, as you say, if you're going to put your Kinder in that role, I think I wouldn't necessarily. Lots of people will consider that an upgrade. I would say they're very similar players in that sort of way. I mean, you look at the role that Jax plays and what he does for G2. I would, and if you look at Jax's number, let's go back to numbers again. If you look at Jax's numbers compared to someone else let's compare him to Shocks, for example. They're both, it's that sort of age going up. They both sort of play. I think Shocks is often, that player on Liquid that sort of, tends to stick around, look for information, sometimes go in first because it feels like he's in that sort of role to be given the chance to do that. And Jax they're very different players, but Jax's numbers are really good numbers for the role he plays, for me, at least, anyway. And I feel Yakinda, if he's put in that one, would that be any different? Would it be hugely different? Maybe, but...
I mean, I'm not sure if
sure.
the Shocks comparison is a really fair one, given Liquid's performance in this particular major.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, yeah.
I mean, I can actually, what I can do is actually bring up the stats once again for you, show Jax's rough sort of. I mean, obviously, no, it's not very detailed on HLTV, but just from a rating perspective, like Shocks really didn't have a great showing over 4 maps. I mean, no one really from Liquid outside of NAF really did. So I'm not sure that's a fair comparison per se.
Yeah, that's fair.
It is one of those things where it is like roll for roll. Like I feel like there are better options to sort of compare on that sort of sense. But as you mentioned, like there's still very capable elements on this roster overall. I don't know, man. It's just a bit of a shock to me to see things go the way that they had. Seeing the start in the year that G2 had, as you mentioned, everyone kind of expected them to go to semi-finals at the very least, and that hasn't happened here. So it is a bit of a difficult one to weigh up. But like the bottom line is that I don't know if these results are going to be accepted by G2 on the basis of what we've seen from them in terms of the roster moves they've made in the last 6 months or so. That definitely feels like that there's going to be a strive to do more internally, whether that be through moves or whether that be through style changes. Only time's really going to tell on that front. I do agree that I personally want to see more time out of the roster, but only really time can tell what G2 want to do. It wasn't the most it was actually the most surprising exit when it comes to our Big Seven. The 2 teams that we sort of really emphasized last week on who we feared the most could end up dropping out in a surprising fashion were Vitality and Cloud9, and we talked about the issues that Vitality had in their roster and how the moves that they made were trying to build up to a championship winning roster, and that really hasn't happened. So I kind of wanted to start there with these guys because they also fell apart, and I kind of wanted to sort of like continue along that sort of conversation thread and start talking about whether or not they would, whether or not like there is a change in their own camp of things, or whether they still also need some more time for their own right, because it is a failing once again, like not to make the major this time, or make the playoffs rather, I should say.
I just don't know that they even would attempt roster moves after making such a big move coming into this major in the first place. Like we gave them time, they got better, and when it came to push to shove, like they go up against like one of the few teams that had actually stuck together as a full roster. Like Heroic haven't made a move. They're ultimately the team that eliminates them from this tournament. Like if this loops back to the idea of like the seeding maybe being a little bit skewed. Like you have a lot of teams that could be placed higher and probably shouldn't be playing against certain opponents in certain rounds, and you know that's what paints you in this corner. But at the same time, like the weakest link, or I guess the one player that you can maybe isolate is Masuda, right? But he's actually had a pretty decent tournament. Like I think Masuda, all in all, has played well above expectations versus what some of the other Vitality members are supposed to be able to provide to this roster. So I just don't even know who you target here, because you can't get rid of the Danes. They're new, and you can't get rid of Apex and ZywOo because you're losing your caller, and well, ZywOo is ZywOo. So I don't even know where you start.
Yeah, I'm on board with this entirely. The thing that worries me about Vitality is they did sort of the one match they won, right? I mean, as you say, I agree with the seeding aspect too, because on the last day I had Heroic and Vitality and G2 and Furo playing against each other, and I'd picked all 4 of them, so I only got 2 of those, and that was frustrating. And with Vitality especially, like their win against Big. That Vertigo game where they lost, I think I'm just looking at it now, yeah, 22-19. They lost in overtime on Vertigo against Big. I mean, that loss was so painful to watch. I mean, there was so many errors, and the fact they got through Nuke against Big as well in overtime again was literally only due to ZywOo putting them on his back, because Dupree had 12 kills in that game. Magisk had 18. I think they won the half Vitality 8-7 on T side on Nuke, and Dupree and Magisk only had 6 kills between them. Like that's just you can't stick like that. Like that is not a consistent way to win for the future. And the fact that they won is basically down to ZywOo with 108 ADR. The closest player next to him was Apex with 73 ADR. So yeah, that was just not reliable way to win in the future. And what I saw on their CT side on Nuke, especially in general, is that there were so many errors. I mean, I don't know whether it was just Dupree, especially considering he was having a poor performance, especially trying to get a bit antsy, maybe try and make something happen to get himself some confidence. But so many times he was caught repositioning. He was pushing, going for aggression in situations where I just didn't think it was necessary. Like, aggression into hut, for example, like repositioning toward top hut too. I think that happened at least 3 times where he got caught off trying to reposition. And aggression not just from him, but also from Magisk and Masuto as well. Masuto, as you say, has actually played relatively well and has had some pretty huge rounds for Vitality in this tournament. But yeah, that CT side nuke was terrifying. I don't know if it was nerves from what I saw, but like it was just there were so many mistakes, and the fact they won was a minor miracle for me.
Mental to even talk about like the idea of nerves for
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
That's what it looked like.
I'm not sure whether it's put nerves per se, because something we talked about obviously is the stylistic clash between Danes and Frenchmen in this team, and that was a concern that was been echoed ever since the roster sort of came together. And I personally feel like a lot of these mistakes that they have are really down to the intricate details of what these guys are trying to do, because it does feel like the philosophies are so different that they haven't quite been able to find the formation for my money. And that was fully on display here with, as you mentioned, how awkward that nuke went, how awkward that vertigo went, how awkward the run was in general. Like across all of their maps, it felt like the only real teams that they were able to beat was the 0-3 squad of Liquid in a confident fashion. They got destroyed by Outsiders and NIP in their best of ones, not even double digits on those maps. The overtimes were ridiculous, 16-14 win against Heroic. Like it doesn't feel like the team are as confident as they should end up being, and I feel like that is just down to that clash right there more so than it is confidence. I don't know if confidence is the right sort of thing to put it down to.
I mean, they're communicating in English as well, so like even those small latent errors that can happen there, whether you're getting a miscomm or it could just be like a slightly delayed bit of communication, like that sometimes that affects things. But you would have hoped that would have ironed out by now, because we've seen some pretty decent results from Vitality. I think they have looked like they definitely look a lot better. But when it comes to like the small nuanced details, those can sometimes go missing. So yeah, the roster's a mess, man. Like it should have been just like this. Felt like almost one of the slam dunk roster moves where they should have been a championship level contender team, and now they don't make top 8. So I feel like this is another we'll give it more time, but I almost feel it's more under the microscope than even the G2 roster in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're going through a bit of a phase at the moment, right, where we've had some kind of great eras, and especially the Astralis era makes like a lot more sense, and they really changed the game. I feel like the Fnatic and the SK, which are sort of obviously the NIP one is a little whatever, but those two, like back in the day, maybe for some people that have like not seen it just kind of felt like the way that they approached the game was very much down to the fact that they were the best players in the world, right? Like the most skillful players in the world. And the way that Astralis approached things definitely did have that. But obviously Device was their strongest player, and he wasn't necessarily number one in the world every year. And I feel like they really, changed the game and changed the approach and the team play and all that kind of stuff, right? So I feel like we're going through a period of figuring out that you can't necessarily bring, especially when theoretical CS has picked up massively since that the past sort of 3 or 4 years, and I think that we're kind of learning that you can't just take players from a great team and add them to players from another great team and expect it to work out, right? I feel like there are obviously what Jay's picked up on, like philosophical differences, game approach differences, just the very way I think that especially these two teams, like, very stereotypically, your Vitality French scene is so different from where the Astralis Danish scene would be. So I feel like we're kind of running into that where they've just tried. I was never a massive fan of this move. Like I think it is in isolation. It's like, oh, you've got some great Astralis players and you've got the best parts of Vitality, so it should, in theory, be a great team. But they're just not gelling, and I feel like they're still working things out. And Dupree is definitely a weird one at this tournament. I really don't know like what it feels like, to be honest. And throughout the whole COVID era and struggling and all that Astralis, I think he's just kind of lost his identity, and the whole online era really did not help him, and he's just not getting back to that. I do feel, although his numbers are maybe not as sick, that Magisk is still playing a bit more like himself, and he still looks sort of similar. And he actually built up a bit more experience in the COVID era with a little bit of eye gelling. But yeah, I think that whole kind of thing of just taking great players and trying to put them together and make it work. It's similar to what Shocks has had over in Liquid. Now, again, give it time. Team's not looking great, whatever, but he is looking particularly bad. He was looking relatively weak towards the end of his time on Vitality. And again, I think with him sticking in Vitality for a while, even though we were all sort of saying, oh, well, he has certain moments and whatnot, but he's definitely not at that run of form. He's definitely not the star player of this team, or even has the potential to do that. I think a lot of it within Vitality would have been those intangibles, would have been, what is he kind of, as we had the conversation about Jax, what is he providing? But Liquid and maybe the players there have gone, I got a great amount of respect for him. I know, like, in the past he was really good and his ceiling's really high. Let's just get Shocks in. Like, why not? What could go wrong? And obviously it's just not really worked. And then him applying those sort of intangibles and maybe some kind of like mid-rounding or keeping the mood great or whatever is going to be very different, because it is just, culture going from France to America is going to be a very different kettle of fish. So I feel like we're in a really interesting time of like figuring out how to. We've had some fantastic eras, we've had some really great teams, but figuring out how to like rebuild and reapproach and get these players who maybe go through a slump to sort of, because it's really interesting that like esports moves way faster than like conventional sports. Especially it feels like in CS, like the change and that anyone can beat anyone, and the major's always a great place for that. There's always a team that overperforms, Spirit, Cough, and like I feel that it really is difficult for players to return to where they were, a year ago or whatever. Whereas in sport, you can kind of be like, okay, I gotta change up my training, or maybe I change teams and uh a new place or a new approach or whatever is going to work for me. But in CS, especially, like it just moves on so fast, it can be hard. So I feel like we're going to get to a point, maybe by the end of the year, that we have to say players like Shocks and Dupree and, are going to end up like just playing for Tricked or whatever, playing for AGF.
Oh, God.
Sort of like,
That,
you know what I mean?
That,
Like,
that would be the ultimate fall from grace. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's
Gave
just-
you a lot of
in a sense
airtime
that
there,
maybe-
and that's the part where we have to.
yeah. But you know what I mean? I think that's maybe a bit extreme, but just sort of in the sense that they have to figure themselves that they are kind of beyond it, and they're not going to be able to return, and they're maybe just holding up spots for. And it's hard, isn't it? Because then you have the whole logistic angle of like you still want to get paid and all that kind of stuff. But I think that certainly like some of these players are going to have to figure out that it is maybe towards the end of their careers for them, or at the very least their top level careers.
I just have to say, like, I personally am of a big advocate of the idea that, hey, the Astralis players just didn't know how good they had it. Like, I think even from Apex's interview, he gave one to, like, I think one PV or something about, like, the integrating these players and, like, how it's different. So the French style is very much like, oh, we like to sit in this setup and we'll see how the round plays out. And, it's very structured in that respect. But the Astralis players have this idea of like, going off of feeling or pushing off of how they feel in a moment or in a round, which is like, yeah, that's great. And I think all the Astralis players have the capacity to do that. But also when they were doing it on Astralis, they had this like incredible foundation and groundwork already laid out after so many years of this roster being together for so long. Like they only swapped out one player at a time ever. And like I almost feel like Device, he was saying like, oh, we got lucky. I feel like there's an element to that as well for these players that have joined Vitality, and that like they would have been working off of instinct, but that's because they also played their same spots for like 2 years at a time. Like if they felt like that they could have done something in that particular spot, they might have been able to change things. But on Vitality, that I almost feel like because of the role swaps, because the foundation is a little weaker as well, like they're just never going to hit the ground running in the same way, and that's maybe why we don't see Device back in this NIP roster when we really should have him. Like they make playoffs without the blockbuster signing, and now as well the Vitality guys don't make it either. So I feel like it's almost fitting, and it's almost another testament as well to how good the Astralis players had it on that roster with Glaive.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say. Like, it's more of a credit to Glaive more than anything else, because like I think was it Thorin made the example of the fact that Astralis were never always the most skilled individuals at where they were. Like, you never had the best LoRPer in the world, the best support player in the world, but it was sort of like that combination of making them greater than the sum of their own parts that really was able to get them to the era that they found, and of course an era that perceives for much longer than they really should have, if I'm being honest. So like, that's more of a credit to what he was able to do in that team, and how that whole roster played out. And I think you do have a certain element of that. I do feel like in the whole grand scale of history, though, like, we are talking about a team that kind of were past it by the time that the moves started to come in. Like, they weren't the era-defining squad anymore. I understand why they wanted to make those moves, why they wanted to sort of like move along from the Astralis side, because there's also the internals about the organization that we've heard loads and loads of rumors about how the contract situation was handled, and I sympathize with that side of things as well. There's a lot to think about as to justifying why they made the move to Vitality. What we definitely know is that obviously so far it hasn't been a project that has worked as of right now. I know that Scrivy had the extreme example of them dropping down to tier 2 Danish teams and then never really coming back to the tier 1 level. It's probably an extreme example of what we've seen from them over the course of the major. It's definitely not a good look to see the Danes, of course, not performing to the level that they should do, considering that there was such a blockbuster signing for this Vitality side. Trav, you had something you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say that I just wanted your opinions on it actually. Like, just in general, Dupree and Magisk, obviously, like, there's such a huge stylistic and probably, verbal difference between Glaive and Apex, for example. Do you think it's also the case of, like, Magisk and Dupree just struggling to play under the chaos that is Apex? Like, because you can see what he's like outwardly, like, I reckon inwardly in communications as well, that probably makes it even wilder to sort of keep track of, I guess, maybe for these. And that's probably maybe why one of the reasons why Dupree especially looks a bit lost sometimes on his CT setups, especially on that nuke that I mentioned. So do you think, like, it's not just communication? Do you think it's just different chaos, sort of a high level of chaos that they struggle to play under, maybe?
It's a possibility. I mean, we've just been talking about how all the previous Astralis stuff compared to how the new team's doing now is a testament to Glaive's IGLing. So I wouldn't really be surprised if that was the in-depth explanation as to why. The specifics as to why, I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I'm not very certain about many things in life. So that's it's something to definitely consider, I think, as we see Vitality move forward.
Yeah, that's just what we hoped had already been ironed out. Like, you shouldn't even need to communicate that much if you have, like, protocols already built up with the team. Like, if this, then do this. Like, that should almost be instinctive to a certain degree. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there is still communication problems. Like, they should almost be able to think for each other at that point. But how long is too long? I think before. Yeah, I can see Skr's angle. Like, maybe they do go trickle down to the lower leagues, because we had a big criticism of VP for a very long time, always hovering around tier 1, but never really doing a whole lot with it. I just think that's at least a year, maybe 2 from real discussions.
Agreed. Well, what we can discuss, of course, is the fact that Vitality are out. They're not going to the playoffs. Everyone hoped that they would. Another team that we also very prevalently featured in our pick'ems was Cloud9. Again, last week we discussed the issues that they might have on LAN, because historically it's a team that always have struggled on LAN, while their dominance in the online era, not translating that to the Stockholm major with a weak run. They still ended in playoffs to their credit. This time it won't end in playoffs at all. And for me this year, I was looking at them and thinking to myself, okay, this is going to be it now. They did the top 6 run at Katowice. It's going to be the start of the new era of this this roster. They're going to finally crack the LAN environment. They're going to finally do some decency here, and then they're going to make the major playoffs. Maybe not go ahead so far as to the top 8, as the top 4 rather. But I was hoping that at least make top 8, and I had faith that they'd make top 8. And then it didn't happen. And I am disappointed, because I've been following this team for a very long time, but we did echo some concerns about it. So for everyone else, is it as shocking to you or as concerning to you that Cloud9, after signing this new roster, didn't make the major playoffs?
They had I mean, yes, in a sense, they had a bit of a difficult, like, run, I think, some of their opening games. Then also it gets really weird on, like, just before elimination or whatever, this, like, article drops about accusations at Hobbit, sorry. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to affect them. What I will say is maybe not making playoffs. You can see as a possibility. They had to do sort of like the run back. Close game against Nip or whatever can be a bit frustrating. But the fact that they drop out to Imperial is more the surprising factor, I think. If they'd have been against, a more difficult team, or if it had been in the final round and it's one of those G2 or whatever kind of matchups, then I suppose they would have had Copenhagen Flames. But all the same, it is a bit disappointing that they drop out to Imperial. And also, yeah, pretty close, but the map that they won. No, okay, so they lost. Sorry, but there was like lots of overtimes in there. It was a really close kind of. There was no whitewash. There was no, and then the last map they just really didn't look on it. So, yeah, I think for me that's kind of the saddest part is that they just didn't really give it a good go in the best of threes. Like I say, weird news, I guess. And I don't know. It's really hard with this team as well because you have to remember like the online era, the 2021, and all that kind of stuff. Um, I think they did overperform a little bit. There's still this kind of can they pick it up on LAN and whatnot. Last major, just about. This major, not really. They've also not made a move for a long, long time. So I really don't know what to think of this team at the moment because I do think that a lot of us in our heads just have like an idea of them being way better than maybe they are. But I don't know. I don't know. They're a difficult team to work around, I think. But it's certainly just going out to Imperial just seems a little unacceptable to me.
I think Cloud9 saw what Imperial did to Fours in the Challenger League or the Challenger stage, and just immediately were like, "Oh my god, that could be us." Like, I see a lot of how we play in how Fours plays, and Imperial just own them. So like, how are we gonna fight back? And then when they lost that overtime. That's when I think the game was just over.
Mm.
I almost feel like the match was lost on the first map because of
Yeah.
how poor like they had a solid lead, then Imperial just keep on chugging along, bring it to the overtime, and then they lose it. Like, that felt like an emotional heartbreak for them, and one that never recovered from in the series. So I disagree with Scriv to a certain extent. Like, I think Cloud9 are one of these top level teams, but they do need to just figure out their nerves, and maybe that is, yeah, Hobbit. The news that comes out, maybe he's not playing to the same levels I think this roster comes to expect. Because if you're looking at instigators, really it is like Axile and Hobbit that control a lot of the sort of mid round decision making and sort of the explosiveness onto bomb sites. That those are the two that you want to have activated. But even like Shiro, I think, was missing a lot of shots. He was getting kind of super countered in that Imperial game. And Shiro is someone that's had to overcome like the idea of like choking in playoffs or choking in like big round moments, because even when they were back in the Gambit youngsters, they'd frequently get to sort of semis or finals, and then Shiro would sort of trickle off into nothingness. Even in these online tournaments, he wouldn't have the as big a result. So I think there's still a mental barrier that once we get past the naffity fake bravado about, oh yeah, we didn't really prep that much for this team, or oh yeah, we
Mm.
could just do whatever we want. Well, I think once they get over that hurdle and realize, like, yeah, you actually need to like put in all the proper prep work, because they were crediting like their analysts ahead of like previous events in 2021, and they said, oh yeah, we had all the strats and all the information we needed to play maps like Ancient or whatever. But are they prepping heavy for Imperial? Like, I almost feel like they would have thought that would have been a pushover game, like, oh, old legends get away, make road for the new age of Nafany. And I just don't think that they put their heads in the right space.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you also just consider some of the decisions that they made over the course of this run. Like, the one that always springs to my mind was the decision to play Nuke against FaZe, for example. Like, why do that is the key question that I'm coming up to when I think about
Not a decision, apparently.
Yeah, that veto went like broke or something. Like their end bugged out and they wouldn't let them do it again.
Oh,
Like
okay, I missed that one then. Okay, well,
from my understanding, it was like a verbal veto, and they
oh
banned
right, okay.
they banned a map in the last round, and it was like there was Nuke and something else left over, and they almost like didn't know that Nuke was still in the pool. They're like, oh shit, we forgot to ban the map that we don't play. Actually,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not, bugs aside or otherwise, like in terms of numbers and performances, like you do mention how Shiro struggled over the course of this major. The Gambit Cloud9 sort of LAN runs have always been defined by Hobbit at least doing good because he has that LAN experience. That can't be applied here in this Legend stage because he didn't do that great at all. Actually, he was second lowest on the board for Cloud9 overall, and that's not just the factoring in the report that came out. It's not just that mental game because you take a look at their early results against outsiders, and he was poor in that particular map up. The phase result, obviously, that was poor from everyone really. From Cloud9, but Hobbit in particular, like scored like 12 kills in that whole map. So we're talking about like some serious regressions on this Cloud9 squad. And when you have those guys that you mentioned, the Rocks of Axel and Hobbit, how they always control and they're not having their great moments. Shiro Zorp always was the star player essentially of this roster during the online era, and with those three elements sort of missing, it feels like Cloud9 lost the plot. And especially when it came to that last map against Imperial, they really fucking lost the plot. Like 16-3 was pure unadulterated decimation, and I feel like that for me personally, maybe they thought that Forza result could have been them. I didn't see that happening in a million years to Cloud9.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see it at all. I mean, Imperial, I mean, as you say, we spoke about just the ridiculous experience difference, which is the main reason that we think that they owned Forza so hard. I still think that has to be the factor here. Imperial mean just like an irresistible force almost in this major. I just don't understand. Everyone's shocked, but I'm also impressed by it. And yeah, Axile, he's always been like in the online era, especially. I always look by looking at statistics and just how they played, watching live. I put like Axel, like he was the king of overpass. Shiro had just ridiculous stats on Vertigo, for example. I think even now, he's had like 10 or 11 negative performances on Vertigo in every single Vertigo he's ever played, going back to the youngsters era. So that's like literally like over 120 maps or something. It's just so consistent on those maps, but. They reach this stage now where I do agree with Scriv. I think they haven't considered a roster change for so long, and now they have the backing of Cloud9. There's so much ridiculous talent in their region. Like, do you consider Mia, for example, who's been AWOL for ages and is an incredibly talented player? There's so much you can think of, and of course, I doubt that Forza would want to let go of any of their players either, considering the recent success they've had. But that's been the sort of repetitive feature of that Forza team, is that Jerry eventually loses some of his best talent. He lost Flip, for example, etc., etc. So if they want to, nab a player from Forza that they're impressed with, like a Shalfie or something, then I can definitely see that happening. I think changes, as Scriv said, is something that will most certainly be a consideration now with that Cloud9 backing.
I mean, especially when you consider, right, they've also brought in Groove as well to manage the team on that side. And we know that he's obviously very in tune with what the CIS region has got to them. I can imagine him potentially looking to be like that talent scout sort of role to a certain extent. In terms of like CIS talents they could potentially bring in, obviously, we've been talking a lot about Yakindar being on the market as of right now, looking the idea that he might move. We would just entertain the idea with G2 potentially. Yumi's got that sour look in his face. Like, I don't think that's going to be
Yakindar's not joining Cloud9. I'll just say that right now.
Like, I definitely realize this is going to be a bit more of an unlikely move, but I just want to throw that out there as a conversation.
No, just never happen. Just not happening. Actually, like it's first off, Cloud9 re-enter Counter-Strike because they get a top-tier team on a budget. Like because of the sanctions, because of the global situation, Cloud9 come in and they steal this roster away for like. What was it, like 1 million, 2 million, something like that?
I think it was $1 million.
That's a steal, man, and they will make that back in sticker money. I'm sure they're fine with where they're at. To be honest, I don't think unless the players really pressure to make a roster move that they'll do anything with this roster.
Okay.
Scriff? Changes?
I was pretty comprehensive, to be fair.
They've made their money, man. Like they've got what they paid for.
Yeah, I don't know as well. I think in terms of options, like Yakindar's gonna have way more as well if he opens up and starts taking them. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether it'd sort of solve their problems either. It's a difficult one because this team, they've been together for a while and they have hit a really high ceiling and they did well at the last minute. They know what they're capable of, so I think they're probably going to try and return. And again, the whole time argument, but they have just joined Cloud9. Um, it's all a bit quick. It's all a bit fast. Maybe just, and they're very young, and maybe just a little overwhelming. And like kind of what Yumi was getting at, I think they also have a bit of humbling to do in places, and just respect each and every opponent. But then this major's probably taught a fair few teams about that. So yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know that Yekindar on a business level, but then also just on like a practicality level is necessarily
No.
going to be the move.
Also, when
Um,
when you consider that, like, most of the time that they were successful, like, people were sort of saying like, "Oh, is this the weakest top 10 we have had in like a fair few years?" Like rosters constantly having like little blips of success and then immediate irrelevance, or they wouldn't make playoffs, or there wasn't a consistent top level team. Aside from maybe like Navi towards the middle of last year, that's where they really picked up a stride. Like there were arguments to be made about, hey, that all we could ever see projected into the finals is like maybe Gambit, Navi. That's about it. Like
mm.
there weren't a lot of real title contenders at the time. So is there even that to sort of sprinkle in and say like, Nafany, this roster ain't actually that hot. You guys just hit a nice little streak while the opponent, your competition, wasn't like full fighting force.
Hmm. I mean, all these are possibilities at this stage for Cloud9. Like, there is very weird times ahead of us, I think, with this team. Although there's a good chance they might just stay with it, because whilst this was a disappointment, they still have at least a couple of good lands, especially from the tail end of last year, carrying forward to here and now, where it does show that this team are capable of something. I'm not certain how much that something's going to continue now with them being under a new org, but at least Cloud9, we know, back their teams at the very least. So I'm sure we'll see a little bit more out of them later on. We talked very heavily about Imperial over the course of that match, and how obviously Cloud9 met their demise towards them. And Imperial themselves had a run that we didn't really expect to make happen. A lot of us had them down as 0-3 in this Legend stage. I think a lot of us had them down as 0-3 in the Challenger stage as well. But ultimately, they got to the 5th round of this Swiss stage. They went so far as to nearly make it to playoffs, but they fell at the very last hurdle. And the popular social media sort of like narrative is that they're heroes. They've superseded all expectations. That they've done had a real good run here in the PGL Major. Do we agree with that assessment of Imperial?
They played
his workout routine, man. He's yoked and he brags like a muff. Like this guy. Honestly, he's still got it. He's still got it, and
Yeah,
he looks great as well. Like he looks so fit, and he looks great in the server as well. So.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree.
I just feel like when we were last time out, I kind of said a bit jokingly, but it was like, if there is a little bit of chaos, there's a team like this where they have a bit more sense, they've got that cohesion, they've got like the passion behind them and all that kind of stuff. They're not going to get flustered. Expectations are not there, no pressure, and they'll probably be able to weave their way through a little bit. And they did. They didn't make it the whole way, but they did, upset a few people and get the community behind them and whatnot. I definitely think, seeding wise and all that good stuff, they maybe had some easier runs. And then also just kind of the fact that, like I say, and like we've touched on a bit with Cloud9 there, not a lot of teams really respected them, and gave them the time of day. Cloud9 have their own issues, and then they have, a BO3 against Bad News Eagles, and then they lose one to Copenhagen Flames. So the Cloud9 result is really solid, but they lost their best of ones, and they had, the elimination game against BNE, which could have really gone either way. So I don't know that on a skillful, tactical, or however you want to, strength of the team kind of level, that they were super sick. They ran in, and it does happen. It happens in all kind of competition when you have a team that's on, a good run of form, no pressure, feeling good, and they come up against a team that clearly have a few issues, a little bit shaky, maybe a bit nervy, and then have also not, as we've talked about, maybe done as much prep. It happens in sports. It happens in other esports. It's how upsets occur. And this was also a relatively close upset. So I think they get one result for me that's like fair enough, well played, and they found the right form at the right time. But I don't know that they necessarily, were in full contention to go through, and they weren't necessarily on this hero run of, look at them beating all these big teams and all this kind of stuff. So, but again, credit and a lot of fun with it, and it's always great to see. And like Michael says, like Fur definitely, definitely maybe a couple of teams I think over in Brazil could give him a bit of a look. But I don't. Again, it's like, where does that kind of go? If the pressure comes back and the expectations are on again, maybe he doesn't perform so well.
Also, are we just gonna forget about the whole 0-0 Nations thing? Because I mean, he didn't look that great on that
That's
team,
true.
I'll
That's
be
true.
honest,
Yeah, I mean, it is
But that
definitely.
whole team doesn't really look that great. So I mean,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a case of him not looking great on a team that also doesn't look great. So it's
You know the difference? They have Fallen in this team.
Ah,
he's really
and
we
they
go.
have actually and
Here
they
we
have
go.
actually fallen off. In fact,
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what we
Like-
said, though, isn't it? That's exactly what we said. Like, who would have thought that out of all the legendary SK, Luminosity core, it's Cold Zera is the one that's missing out, and FNX is the one that's made it this far. Like, it's wild. Like, no one would ever have predicted that before. I mean, I said the other day, like, the thing that stuns me the most about Imperial is that it's not even that these players have come back into like 2016 form, at least Fur has, but like it's that the whole team's like protocols and synergy and cohesion is just like it's actually there. Like it's they legitimately when they won against Cloud9 on Mirage, especially. I know that's down to Cloud9's sort of inability to sort of step up, I guess, but they played like a top 15 team and they don't even look old fashioned in the way they did it either, right? Like they all played as if they do everything right in like the modern meta that we know now with the CS these days, which is just wild to me. It's just not what you expected at all. And as I said on our previous show, I believe as well, this sort of thing has to inspire people like Glaive, for example, who is is struggling with a new team as well. I mean, obviously it's not a classic core like Imperial have, but it has to inspire people like Glaive to evolve his IGLing even further and again go on a run like this, like Fallen has.
Well, I will say, Fallen sussed out a couple of interesting bits and pieces. Like, obviously, the one that stands out to me the most is the one-way smoke, the one at Sandbags over on Vertigo, which I think was in the Copenhagen Flames series, where he got that really important kill that I was able to sort of get Imperial back into that whole matchup on the T side. So, like, there are little bits and pieces there where I do feel like Fallen still got like a brain. Yes, we're going there at some point.
But
I still feel like he's got the brain to be able to suss things like that out. And I do feel like that's what's given them a slight edge in terms of that experience level. Those results where they completely destroy teams like Cloud9, Forza, blah 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 blah. Yumi, you had a point to make real quick?
I was just gonna say, I almost feel like Imperial had a bit of a case of stage fright. Like the spotlight's always on the other team that they're facing. Like even when they're playing against someone like B&E, there's a lot of excitement about them. I'm kind of leapfrogging off of Scrip's point about not a lot of people gave Imperial the time of day, but then the one matchup where it feels like they might actually be favorites, even like against Copenhagen Flames. That's when they decide to go missing. Like I feel like the confidence just has to be shaken a little bit there.
I mean, it wasn't the only close series that they had and close map that they had. I actually, I got a Fitbit last week, and for those of you who don't know about Fitbit, they have a heart rate monitor, and you don't even need to look at the match to tell how close they were, because my heart rate monitor is just spike for every time I was watching those fucking games.
You're not the one playing, Jay.
I was the one watching, and my pick'ems were riding heavily on a lot of those games.
Feels like it.
But I do want to talk about one topic that obviously was the dominant sort of talking point about Imperial over the course of the major. It was on social media, and I'm not asking this to stoke the fires. I'm genuinely interested in some opinions about Fallen. And the question obviously was he overrated in this team? And maybe in this tournament you could argue from an IGL perspective. As an individual perspective, and I'm just going to flash this up on screen, it does feel to me like he wasn't the player to rely on for this squad.
Yeah, so I think this whole thing, right, and it's, the Brazilian scene, you don't really want to, like, Thorin knew 100% kind of what he was doing, even if he believes, because I think, so you have a few different angles. Overrated doesn't necessarily mean bad. There is a case to be made that at the time, one of the better IGLs, I think certainly one of the faster thinking, and knew how to use his parts very well and give them kind of the freedom, because there was a lot of that going on in the SK days. I don't think that, Fallen was necessarily guiding everything. There was a lot of Fur's got a Mac 10 and a good spawn, so he's just going to go crazy. Um, it's also very, very hard. We don't have many of them anymore. The AWPing and the IGLing is an awful lot. You just can't really do it anymore. Like Cadian, credit to him for all his, drama and performance and screaming and whatnot. He does a really solid job at a very hard thing to do. But what I will say, maybe a different way to word it, is going back to what we touched on a little bit earlier. I think Fallen maybe definitely the liquid move, I think, was maybe overstaying his welcome a little bit at that super high level.
Even staying in MIBR, man, like that.
Yeah, I suppose it's different when it's like a Brazilian team, isn't it? Because he just has so much respect and influence and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
it's funny. It's liquid as well, because we talked about Shocks. I think they've done it twice now, where they've just kind of gone, "You were a really good player. Why don't you come and play like that for us?" And it's just not worked like either time. So
I think my angle on it is like, first off, Thor knows Twitter ain't a good place to make a nuanced point. Like, he just knows. He knows. He should know that, but I'm sure he understands. But yeah, if you were going to rate him in the same way that you would have rated him during that sort of 2016, 2017 era in current day, yeah, I think it's fair to make the argument he might be overrated. That doesn't take away from any of his accomplishments or what he stands for the scene, because he is the face of Brazilian Counter-Strike. He's built a lot of the sort of groundwork to facilitate new talent into the scene with like Gamers Club, and he's got like crazy sponsorship. Like, this guy is literally everywhere when it comes to Counter-Strike in the Brazilian scene. And so it's not like his stature or his reputation is really what's being inflated here. It's just the idea that he might be like a top 5 AWPer in the world. And I think that might be where, I mean, you're gonna read comments from fans about their favorite players. Like, you'll see tier 2 teams with like these very vocal fans saying like, he's the next Simple or he's the next side. Like, it's just not the case. Like, until they reach that level, they can never be in the same spotlight, or they can't be held up to each other. So I think it's just simply like, he's not made a very good point on his on like the character limit that he has, and well, he's just gonna get clowned on for it, because
Yeah.
it's just gonna be taken in a different way.
But it's like, I understand what his whole angle is, though, because, like, again, as I mentioned, from an IGL perspective, this Imperial team did go as far as they did under Fallen, and he led them to this point where they almost made the playoffs, when it was obviously a big storyline, very dramatic, such close affairs, big comebacks, overtimes for days. Like, we're talking about a team that did well under his sort of position, but it's like, as you mentioned, from a player perspective, that's where the whole thing falls down for him, because there were far better players individually on this Imperial side, and I'd hate to take it away from someone like Fur I'd hate to take the credit away from him just because Fallen is such a well-established player. Again, it doesn't take away from anything he's done so far. It doesn't take away anything he's done within this Imperial roster. Even he on Twitter himself said, listen, we went further than we really should have done, and I find that to be a very humble sort of opinion and a very humble take from his own side of things, and it gives me more faith that this is a team that has a bit more longevity in it than many people expected. And absolutely, they superseded expectations in this major. Everyone sort of like just looked at them as check stealers, or just what would be ultimately an unsuccessful project, and it has had at least a little bit of success here in this major. But the overall point that was trying to be made, yeah, I would say to an extent he was a bit overrated.
Yeah, I think the thing is that with the tweet, it's Thorin used the words and the saying all time. So it's like you can't.
That's
you
the one
can't,
thing.
You can't say that, because Thorin
First off, Shroud
literally
exists.
yeah, literally. Exactly. Like, the thing is that for what he's done, like even in the God tier era, he was the second best player in the world, no, behind Coldzera, if I'm not mistaken. So like, you can understand that, especially Brazilian fans put him on the pedestal of this absolute GOAT and this god of the scene. But the reality is, is that he is, because he's done so much for that scene, so much for Brazilian Counter-Strike. He's sure, maybe in this event, maybe he's overrated, but he knew exactly what he was doing, making those comments, trying to rile everything up. And I mean, Simple's reply is, one that will go down in the annals of all-time replies in CS Twitter history, won't it? But like, at the end of the day, I just don't see a world in which you can call him overrated in terms of a player. There's an argument, because people could even call, like, there are some people who call the greatest footballers of all time overrated, because they're just respected as such gods. You can understand why some people may say, oh, you really think he's that good? But yeah, I think Fallen, just overall as a personality and as a player, you can't say that he's one, underachieved, or two, been overrated for me, just in general.
I don't think you can say it's been underachieved. But again, it's a case of separating a player from IGL roles. So whatever interpretation you make, whether it be my interpretation of seeing it as right or your interpretation of seeing it as wrong, like, we can have this discussion all day, but I am a little bit conscious for time. So we'll move on from Imperial, because they won't be moving on into the champion stage. A team that will be moving on to the champion stage at the behest of all of us who had them down as 0-3 in certain cases is Team Spirit, which I'm not sure this was the appropriate position that they should be at here in this major. I did not see this coming at all, and I feel like, honestly, Spirit definitely benefited from the best of one format in this major.
What I will say, just to get it kicked off, is that I'm upset with both Furia and Heroic. They both qualified. Good for them. Have a wonderful playoffs. But Furia picked Nuke into Spirit. Everyone saw that Spirit, they've got a pretty decent Nuke. And then, okay, that's a bit scary. Then Heroic picked Nuke into Spirit as well. I was like, please, guys, like, come on. I know it's stupid of me to have picked them 0-3, and realistically, B&E was the obvious one. But I genuinely thought Spirit 0-3 was vaguely reasonable. Like, it wasn't something that seemed completely out of left field and out of the blue. I just thought that maybe this would be a stage too far for the new boys, like, like Patsy and Siren. And yeah, and then Furia just gave them one of their best maps, even when they were performing really poorly online. Nuke was one of their better maps. So yeah, I just couldn't believe that was the way it occurred. But there we are.
But also, Heroic and Furia are good Nuke teams. So
That's
like,
the thing.
do you sort of argue like, oh yeah, you should just ban? I mean, Spirit's good on Nuke, so why don't we just avoid that? Like, oh yeah, they had a good challenge.
Veto.
Yeah, I don't know if I really back that. Like, Heroic last major were ready to challenge Na'Vi on it, and when they didn't play it, they were really surprised. Like, they were willing to beat a team that had a long winning streak on that map and were gonna solidify their major run on that map. So I don't know, man. Like, I feel like the veto makes sense from their perspective. They're coming in thinking like, yeah, we're the favorites. Why should we be scared of this underdog CIS team that's recently like integrated some academy players, for God's sake? Like, I feel like there has to be some level of confidence there.
It's weird, isn't it? It's weird. I feel like Spirit actually played relatively well. When you talk about like BNE, they sort of had that gotcha style that worked in the earlier. We talked about this, didn't we? It worked in the earlier stages, but probably not going to keep working against the top level teams. And again, it's one of those where like this whole prep cycle, and there's so many teams involved, and how much time do you have, and all that. I definitely think teams will have been like, right, eyes on Ents, because they're looking really solid at the moment. And a team that maybe we've not played and had as much experience with in the past. And then eyes on this BNE team, because everyone, they're really hard to play against, or really weird to play against, or whatever. And then Spirit maybe just, get a little bit less time, and that's maybe why. But yeah, it is also, veto-wise, it is really difficult. I agree with Michael, because it's like, where do you go? What do you do? We don't have enough info. And like, also, yes, our map here in Nuke is pretty decent. But they played some pretty solid Counter-Strike for me. And I think it was Patsy, wasn't it, who's had quite the performance considering age and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, pretty impressive stuff. It feels a little bit more legit than your sort of Imperial run, to be honest. Whether it keeps going, I don't think so. But that's what I said last time, right? And I think Trav and I, we were in the same sort of mindset, weren't we? Where it's like, this team not even 6 months ago was like outside the top 100, didn't have a roster, and now they've worked it out. And the past even God, like 2 months. They've just been flying and beating everybody. Surely it has to come to an end at some point. But so far, no end in sight apparently. So I've not got them in my pick'ems. I'll say that now, or like going through anyway. But there's maybe a world in which they just go. And again, it's another CIS roster, Ghost of Vegas Squadron, and then no pressure, no expectations. Everyone, well, most people are rooting against us. Let's just go out there and play some Counter Strike, boys. No worries. We're not going to get fired. We're not going to have rumors of leaving, or there's players on the horizon that might be able to replace a couple of us. Let's just go out and have a good time. And sometimes in these massive tournaments where teams like FaZe and Na'Vi and NIP even have got so much bloody pressure on themselves, like sometimes it's good to just be like, yeah, man, we'll take it as it comes. If we win, amazing. If not, it's not the end of the world. It's a nice sort of flow state, as they say, to be in, I think, for the Spirit team.
Incredibly young team, isn't it? I mean, that's the main thing as well. Like you can say that perhaps it being a young team would be a disadvantage. We've seen that with Forza, and we've seen that with other teams in the past. But I think it comes down to that mentality, or these guys just have that mentality, as you so rightly say, of just not being too bothered. They know they've got a shot. They've taken advantage of their shot, and fair play to them. And yeah, I think it's a roster that could probably go quite a long way into the future as well if they stick together and keep working. I mean, you could say Imperial, for example, as you say, sort of compared them to, it's definitely more of an impressive story. Imperial will definitely, stick together. Like they're just too ridiculously popular to not stick together, and they'll have plenty of time just to ride out the wave at the end of their career. That's why it's called The Last Dance. But Spirit, the fact these youngsters have performed so well, and Patsy secondary AWPing as well, like I feel like that's was the biggest shock to a lot of teams who played them, how good the secondary AWP was. Patsy got so many kills. There was that one game, wasn't there, where he like jumped like eight kills in 2 rounds or something, which got them back into a game. And it's just a factor that seems to catch off. That seemed to have caught off a lot of those players. Of course, as we all did, I'm sure, you go through that IEB major website and look to see how the draw goes. Obviously, I had Furia beating Spirit in the first BO1, and then I saw how it played out after that. I was like, oh, do they win that one? That's kind of, 60-40 against them. Oh, that one's 60-40 against them too, and that's why I picked them 0-3. It relied on Furia, winning that first one, but yeah, in the end, it didn't play out. And to be fair, even my 3-0s, right? Like, all my 3 options that I had for 3-0 in my mind, all of them wouldn't have played out how I wanted them to. So there you go.
I have to say there has to be some sort of like a good. I almost feel like there's a good culture behind the Spirit guys at the moment, because
Yes,
I remember watching Dexter and Patsy on like Espada in like 2019 or whatever. These
me too.
like like a squad that out of any Russian team that I'd seen at the time had like the best sort of chemistry and team coordination. Like if anybody wanted to boost up, it didn't even seem like they had to call it, or like they didn't hesitate. It would be built in an instant. Like they just felt like they had a level of team cohesion that is so absent, even in some top tier teams in current days. So when they had Holly come in as coach, and while he's a little controversial at the moment, I suppose, but to have Patsy then go down to the Academy League, because he was like 16 at the time, 17, but by the time that they made the move to Spirit, it's cool to see them reunited, and actually like Patsy's not just playing like bad positions. Like he's actually doing like star level shit at an age like this. And to see him reunited with Dexter, like there's something poetic about that. Like I love that even though Spirit was a shambolic mess at the last major, like, and they just tried to tear it all down, they've been able to build something with some level of cohesion and actually rapport between players as well.
I mean, I definitely have to agree with pretty much everything that you guys have said for the most part. Like the numbers in particular, just showed the ratings a moment ago, are definitely like up there when it comes to how an overall team has performed. I just feel like that spread over 5 maps, and considering like the opponents they faced, I don't think that would have been the same case had Furia and Heroic been best of 3 results or best of 3 matches. I think that maybe I am just struggling to get over the internal sort of narrative I have in my head that I don't think Spirit are as good as they really are, or I mean, like I just feel like they benefited heavily from the format. So I wanted to sort of like throw that one out there. Maybe it is a case that I am just biased as fuck, but I kind of wanted to sort of like get your feelings. If we had like Heroic and Furia be best of 3 matches, do we feel like Spirit would have made a run? Do we feel like they would have gone to the playoffs?
Probably not, right? Because you have like that first map where it's like, oh wow, okay, and then the top level teams and they'll like sit back and work it out, and it might be a bit harder for them, but they probably maybe one of them, but probably not both, right? I don't know. Do you want to do like the broader question of the format, or
We can do. I forgot we do.
yeah, because I feel like it is worth mentioning that the BO1s have been a little bit annoying in places. I know it's hard, and running these tournaments or whatever. But I mean, it'd be really nice to get the major to a point where it's similar to like the League of Legends Worlds or the TI or whatever, and it does run on a little longer. It's hard though, isn't it? Because they run them themselves, and they're obviously going to be a loss leader most of the time. But even just like maybe the opening game being a best, that I think that was the older format, wasn't it? And at the same time as well, from a viewer perspective, we've got so many goddamn games going on. I can't keep up. I can't track all the teams. You know what I mean? And you have to go back and watch some. And if you're in a job like ours, where maybe you need, if especially if you're like one of the analysts or whatever, and you need to like go and catch everything and make sure you get most of it, it's pretty difficult because there's just so many games going on. So I don't know, I'm definitely, to answer your question in the short, I don't think that they would have made it through if we were sat in best of threes. And maybe if you are like a stickler for true uh even level where everyone should be kind of competition, then maybe that means that, yeah, we need to have a conversation about moving things towards more best of threes, even for, these earlier stages.
Just for context, TI does like last year they did a 9-team group stage in 2 groups, and it was round robin and then playoff bracket. That was how they ran that. So that was just all best of ones in
Right.
the group
Okay. Fair.
stage and then straight into playoffs. So they're similar, I guess, to some extent, but you actually need a best of 3 win to get yourself into a playoff position here. So I don't know how you
That's
fix it.
fair
Like
enough.
there's so many teams that you have to accommodate for that it's just like it doesn't seem feasible to run it any other way, in my opinion. Like
I mean,
I've
I
tried to
feel,
think about it.
is there maybe an argument like the challenger stage runs like this, and then the legend stage has a little bit more emphasis on the BO3s. I don't know, because I know the way that they I can't remember what it was called, but I know the way that they used to do it was more like um a best of one to open, and then straight into like a BO3 elimination, and then on the other side of the bracket, a best of one winners game, and then a BO3 to kind of decide in the middle. And I feel like that was a little bit flawed. I think we literally did this last time, didn't we? And everyone said it took way too long for me to explain like the format or whatever, so it probably won't work. But I do feel like there needs to be a little bit of a change, and maybe make the legend stage in particular a little more best of 3 heavy. Um, because
Yeah.
again, it's another one of those things where it's like some of these online teams like Spirit, they maybe have a few more best of ones that creep in some tournaments. Although, to be fair, with the online stuff, we're mostly at best of threes. I just think it's also very unique to the major. A lot of the tournaments, Pro League and your blasts and everything, for the most part, are running on best of threes. So I think it's like biggest tournament of the year, little bit flatter, and then also the teams are just not as prepared. So teams like Vitality and G2 and whatnot that maybe have dropped to best of one in places can have that as a little bit of an internal excuse as to why the run didn't go as well, especially when they're making it to the final round and then having to play a top 10 team to get through to the stage a little bit further on. So it's I don't know, I'm just not a fan of how heavy these best of ones are for the major.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I think at least we do have the best of three, qualification and elimination matches, because obviously that wasn't even the case in the past. Like, it was just
Yeah.
pure beer one Swiss. That's a good thing. As you say, we sort of reached a stage. I think it's not even the Swiss stage that's really the problem. I think it's just, as you said, it's the seeding in general, because the seeding continued over from the RMRs, didn't it? Like, the teams who performed the best in the RMRs had a particular seed, and then they just got sort of, that would continue on as the bracket would go on. And as you saw, like, even in that final round, I mean, for me in particular, I'd picked 4 teams: Vitality, Heroic, Furia, G2, all 4 of them, and it just so happened all 4 of them played against each other. And then you had Copenhagen Flames and Imperial playing against each other in that second one, which I know Michael doesn't really like
It's a
very
joke.
much.
It's a joke, man.
Yeah, and like, so sure, that's a bad aspect of it, but you could say that, well, if you didn't want those final 3 matches, then the better team should have won their match earlier on, which is fair enough. But at the same time, that seeding aspect is the flaw for me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the seeding in the context of like the Swiss system is definitely something I'm not a fan of. Like, I remember they tried to introduce the Buchholz system in London, in the London major, and it didn't work well there. So while we've got it back here and now, I don't understand. I think we had like reseeded systems in previous Swiss systems as well, and that was a system that worked much better. I just feel like a lot of these issues could have been circumvented had we had a much more traditional, like, 4-team group stage double elim with best of 1 opening matches and best of 3s all the way else from there. Like, I'm not saying completely eliminate the best of 1s, because as you mentioned, Scriv, time constraints are always going to be a problem, but it's like to have so much emphasis. Essentially, like, Spirit got through on 2 best of 1s and a best of 3 against Copenhagen Flames, and the best of 1s were against teams that we had as potential 3-0s, very heavy favorites to make it into that next stage of the bracket. And when we consider that, we always say anyone can win a best of 1, you have to sort of look at this run and think that is it really like a legit run from a team like Spirit, for example, like, because of the everything we've just discussed so far, and that's sort of like the thinking that I'm coming up with. I feel like a lot of this could have been circumvented had we had like, systems of the majors of old.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna get too much in my I had I had Heroic 3-0, so I mean, I'm obviously sad about
I
it.
had Fury of 3-0, so we're in a similar boat.
I can't knock it, like, I cannot knock the Spirit hustle, and I don't care that they're in this position. I actually have them. I'm sure we'll get into our playoff brackets later, but like, I'm backing them now. Like, I've doubted them all the way through. May as well start somewhere.
Well, before we get to those brackets, I do want to discuss one more team before we get into discussing the champion stage, and that is to be Copenhagen Flames, because 5th time's the charm. They did make it in at the very last hurdle, a very, very late entrance into this into this playoff bracket. And it's funny that Retro's not here for this show, because he was the biggest proponent of Copenhagen Flames on LAN in the in the post challengers post show, and it turns out he was proven right for the most part. It was a struggle from these boys, but they did manage to make it through, and I do feel that there was some bright sparks overall. Like, for me, Nico Odos and Zyphon had an absolute hell of a stage.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've been, as you say, I'm also alongside Retro, and that I've always supported this team a lot. I think they've been doing their LAN performances. I mean, Michael made the point to me last night about how, like, it's just so frustrating to see them just literally shit the bed online and just do nothing, basically. Impressive between hand. But LAN is where it matters in the big tournaments of the year, so I just feel like they deserve it, especially after they're getting so close as they did in Stockholm. And man, even looking at the matches they lost in the stage, like, I'm just looking at it. Sorry, they beat B&E 16-14 close, but that was their first match. They beat Ent 16-8, and then they lost to Spirit, sure, but Spirit, we've seen, made it through the whole way anyway, and they still took a map off FaZe. And I mean, like, that is like, you would expect FaZe to, in any sort of way, maybe probably to 2-0 them. So I'm just incredibly impressed with everyone on Copenhagen Flames. As you say, Nico Dawes is just doing so well in that AWP role. I think he's playing to the best of his abilities that he's ever played. I've known this guy since he was playing 10-mans in various friends' discords that I used to be in. I think Roy drops off quite considerably in BO3s when it comes to his statistics, but I still think he's doing enough for the team. And as you said, so rightly said, it's Zyphon and Yabi for me as well. Yabi is one of the entry player that I've been most impressed with in Copenhagen Flames, is all Copenhagen Flames' LAN tournaments. I think his entry ability and his first bullet aim is just absolutely ridiculous. And I remember, obviously, Nikodos's interview after they qualified, saying that he thinks Xiphon has the best aim in Denmark, which was a statement and a half. But honestly, they have the components to keep going with this five. And I mean, obviously, there was an interview. I wasn't there afterward. From Daniel Vorborg, I believe it was, saying that they will listen to individual offers for the team, which makes sense considering obviously Copenhagen Flames can't offer them as much as other bigger organizations can. But if this five continues and they continue to get LAN opportunities, I can only see them getting more consistent in general, honestly.
Yeah, I can agree. I think they're a relatively solid team. Again, it's a little. I think they're in a good spot. It's kind of Spirit of the one that, at least on paper, is crazy that they made it through. We can talk about the Counter-Strike that they played and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, this team feels like they're naturally in a good spot where it's like, okay, they lose out to the better teams here in the BO3s, but close. They're not necessarily overperforming. I mean, the final sort of elimination game there into Imperial is most certainly the easiest team they could have gotten out of the five that they would have to face. So there is that. They'll be thanking whoever made those kind of decisions or however it got there or whatever. But all the same, I do feel that they look good. I think they're a decent squad. It is that whole online argument. Again, online, I think they have a little bit of a pep talk with themselves, and they're in a really, really good headspace and a really, really good 5-man in that sense. And I think they can be happy. I don't think they should make it any further. To be honest, but again, it's one of those where it's like, I think at this point you maybe have to look towards Copenhagen Flames, or you have to look towards Spirit as being one of the teams that maybe continues to overperform. So we'll see in terms of the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, I like them. I think they're good. It is just a bit annoying when it comes to, like, when we would cast them, the four of us, in some kind of capacity online, and then they just flop, right? And again, it's going to happen in a sense. I think they've got ECL. It's very unfortunate. They've got like ECL games at the moment that they're having to like forfeit and whatnot. So that's sort of another tournament where it's not their fault. It's definitely circumstance, but we're not going to see them perform as well, or place as well, I should say, place as well online. And that's another important one. You want the longevity of the five and all that kind of stuff. Your qualification spot, obviously, into conference and stuff is jeopardized a bit. So fair bit of weight on the playoffs for them maybe now as they move into it, because they are sacrificing other pretty important tournaments. But as we always say, the caveats on those and whatnot, the org, I'm sure, does not mind, because the sticker money, I'm sure, keeps coming in.
Yeah, and I'm sure all the Copenhagen Flames guys that listen to this are feeling really good. Like, oh my god, we have so many good things to say about this team. But yeah, this team is shocking. Like online, they are actually they're bad actually. And watching them last major, like I was a big backer. I love seeing an underdog make it to new heights. I love the idea of like Hooksy coming into the squad and being able to build it from the ground up, even with some older pieces, some newer, some younger pieces as well, and still find like a level that is consistent. But I think, like, as much praise as Nikodos gets, I not a fan. I think this guy misses way too many important shots. Like, he's a good fundamental AWPer. He makes some good decisions, but when it comes to like really crunch time moments, I feel like this guy misses far too much. And maybe that's just an experience thing, and that's just not going to happen at this major. I can only pray, but there is a certain level where I like when people were talking about Copenhagen Flames getting picked up by a different team. I did actually just think they would say, okay, we'll pick up the core and we'll just replace Nikodos with like Device or Farlig or someone that has like a bit more X factor about him. Because Nikodos, I just don't think has that extra level to step up to. Maybe he proves me wrong. I don't care. It's his career, Like I want these guys to succeed in the way that they best see it fit. But Yeah, I think you look at his statistics as an AWPer, during this online period, between majors, he's not exactly like the highest impact guy on the squad. Usually that is Roy or Yabi in some of these crazy rounds. So I'd love to see more from him, but I'm too beat down by how poor they looked between the majors to really back this team. And until they can show that they can find a level online or between these events as well as make it at the major, like I can't in good faith support that in my like it feels too much like a Cinderella run to make
Yeah.
it feel good for me.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, look, how else are they going to be able to get further on in land if they can't do online stuff? If they can't get through an online qualifier in open or closed fashion, like how the fuck are they going to get to an IEM or an ESL Challenger? ESL Challenger might be a bit easier in terms of invites, but it's like, if you can't do that online, if you can't make those online runs, then where else are they going to get those LAN opportunities? Which I think is where the whole thing falls down for Copenhagen Flames. And it's like, yeah, they'll do well in terms of the RMRs and how the ranking system works for the major to get into the major itself, but doing anything other than that, getting any further than that is the concern for Copenhagen Flames for me. I feel like with them going so far as the playoffs is definitely an achievement, and it's an improvement upon what they did in the previous major. I also feel like there's an element of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they're going to be in the arena for the first time in an official matchup. Like, the show match in Stockholm doesn't count. But in terms of, like, an actual, like, major match, this is, like, their first time in an arena as far as memory serves me, because the whole online era has not given them an opportunity. So having that extra experience and that extra pressure is something you have to take into account for Copenhagen Flames, in that they haven't played in that environment yet. This will be the first time they have that chance to do so. And the Legend stage, whilst it was a positive run for them, it was still down to the 5th rounds. They barely scraped by, and that's not encouraging going into an even bigger, better, and more prestigious environment.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree. I am, as you say, it'll be their first big one. The thing that does sort of give me some sort of confidence in them is I think that they, a bit like B&E in just making this stage in general, I think Copenhagen Flames realise this is almost their maximum they can possibly do. Like, their goal was to finally break through, win that final match, and get to an arena and play in an arena for the first time. And I think they're quite confident and content with making that one step and getting to that stage, because I don't think they themselves believe they can win the major, for example. So it's just they've made that stage, they've made that step. I think they're pretty happy with it. And actually, as you say, I mean, we'll get onto the playoff brackets in a second, but I think they've actually got probably the best team to play against in the playoffs. So, like, there's a genuine chance for me they could at least get one more, because obviously we know that Ents, obviously, which we will get onto, they also have inexperienced arena players. So who knows? That one's up in the air. But I think Copenhagen Flames are happy to get this far, and I think because of that, they will stick with it for a while yet.
Any closing
also, I will
thoughts?
just say, by the way, the fact that they have to even play ESL Challenger League while they're at the like, that is just ESL leader. Like, act like that's just dumb. Like,
it's annoying, isn't it? Like, I think we've been talking about new format for ECL is pretty cool. It's a little bit more cutthroat, but then the older format of like round robin, loads of teams would have suited them way better here. But because it is just like winners,
I think they're.
Like,
I don't have like, I understand. Like, I like casting ESL Challenger League, but also the format shift for EU. Kind of shit, in my opinion. Like, you go from grinding out advanced, and then you played 2 best-of-3s in the highest level of the competition, and then maybe you're out. Like, that is dumb to me. But they're competing with a heavy schedule. Like, that is the only reason that they could like argue that makes sense, because North America and Asia, they still have round robin group stages. Like, they kept that format.
Okay,
I mean, there are probably reasons why that whole format was ditched, but that's a conversation for a completely different show as far as I'm concerned. For now, let's move on to the champions picks. Once again, I asked all of our panelists to submit their not final, but they're in preliminary picks because apparently we can just change it on the fly. So some of these might not necessarily be accurate to what is going to be finalized between everybody themselves. So let's jump in and start talking about that. We'll start with myself once again. A couple of common trends that you'll see over the course of this. We have a pretty unanimous decision on at least the majority of the bracket. I've gone with FaZe, Furia, ENCE, and Na'Vi into the quarterfinal, into the semi-finals. FaZe and Na'Vi to make it to the grand finals, and for FaZe to take the whole championship. Yumi is pretty much in agreement himself. He's also decided that FaZe, ENCE, and Na'Vi will make their way into the semi-finals. Although you have swapped out Furia for Team Spirit, and you think they're going to go so far. Another thing as well is ENCE going so far as to go up against FaZe, which I'm not. We'll get into that in a little bit's time. Trav, you have gone with the surprise pick of Copenhagen Flames here. I just realized my overlays are broken. That is my bad. I'll go ahead and fix that. While I do mention that you've got Copenhagen Flames over ENCE, so that's something to consider.
Watch out, yeah.
Yeah, and Scriv, you've gone with mostly the same thing, actually. FaZe, Furia, Copenhagen Flames, Na'Vi, and then FaZe, Na'Vi in the grand finals with FaZe to take the whole thing. The one thing that we do have consistent across all of our sides of the of our brackets is that we do have FaZe as the champions of the major. And for me, it does feel like right now that is the most likely outcome of all.
Yeah, I just saw the Scriv tattoo and I felt like I just had to back him. So, like, it's a level of commitment that I'm not ready for, but I believe in what Scriv's got in his head. So.
Well, there you go. There you go. I mean, I'm the only one still on for the diamond coin, so
yes.
Logic would dictate.
I mean, I decided to be a little bit more wacky with my picks because I'm already out of contention for that.
Well, there you go.
I'm fine with Silver. Silver's fine for me.
Well,
like,
I guess I wanted to start there, actually, Yumi. Justify ENCE going over Na'Vi for me. I want to know where you've come to that conclusion.
I think this is the tournament for an international roster. And in my head, I have it as hell. It doesn't matter which international roster for me, like ENCE or FaZe. Even if one of them loses, fuck it. Like this is a time for us to push past that narrative of you need to be a fully national team because of the communication, the chemistry. You share the same culture, maybe same experiences. Honestly, screw all that. I hated that from the start simply because theoretically you should be able to just place 5 players in a team and they should just work. This is a job at the end of the day. I don't care if you're friends with each other. Just play well with each other in the server. Like, it doesn't always work out as easy as that because personalities always conflict. But that should be the theoretical peak of Counter-Strike is that it shouldn't matter. You should just do your job and do it well.
I mean, there are some more intricate sort of stances on that side of things, like in terms that we talked obviously about the vitality thing and how the nations sort of don't always blend together, but that's a whole thing that we've kind of been over at this particular stage. I do feel like for Na'Vi, the one concern for me is obviously the global situation with them right now, and their heads might not be 100% in the game. But given how they've played so far, I don't feel that's going to be a massive problem. I do think it's going to be enough of a hindrance, though, for them to go down against FaZe, and I feel like we're kind of all in agreement on that side of things. Why not? I mean, for those of us that did pick Na'Vi and FaZe in the grand finals, why FaZe over Na'Vi?
Ooh, I think probably just run of form is a little bit better. It is sort of that again. I think the whole community really has the kind of feeling of like, okay, it felt for our storylines and all that kind of stuff, it felt like Na'Vi and Simple get there first last time out. Now it feels like FaZe and Carrigan get there first, so storyline wise, it feels pretty good. But then also, just I think the run of form that we've seen the past few tournaments. I don't know that Na'Vi, they've not played them a great deal, to be fair. And I don't know that necessarily Na'Vi have been more the difficult team. I don't know. It's hard because, like I said, they haven't played each other a lot. But it was more G2 that FaZe were like, struggling and having to overcome and all that sort of stuff. And G2 aren't here. So I feel like FaZe can play their own game, even just the quarters and the semis, and then mad focus on to getting Na'Vi into the final. Now, where it maybe does indeed get a little bit weird is like if Na'Vi don't actually make it that far, and then they have to maybe rethink their game plan a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like FaZe's side of the bracket is a hell of a lot easier, so they should absolutely should have way more momentum coming in for the final and everything. So yeah, it is run of form, all eyes on them, and just it feels like it's about time for some of these players. In fairness, a twist obviously had things really soured with Liquid when they were playing really well. Rain has been ever patient, and just the soldier and
Rain
working
just
really well
vibes,
in this
man.
team, being a star, being a support, he's now kind of just more of a role player. Like I think now is kind of your Brokey is breaking out. It just feels like everything is in good form, you know.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, as you say, it is a bit of a romantic pick as well, to say that, this is finally Carrigan and Rain's time after all this time, that they
Mm.
finally got the team to, give themselves a major trophy. What I will say is that I'm not discounting Navi at all. While I think their match against Heroic is going to be really fascinating, I think that could genuinely go either way, even though obviously Heroic have not had much past success against Navi. I think, as I said, I think in the previous edition of this show, I think that if Navi win the major, that is one of the most legendary victories in all of esports. As you so rightly
Yeah.
said, like with everything else going on behind the scenes and how they're feeling, probably. If Simple can somehow win a second major in a row despite everything, that would, I mean, he's the GOAT anyway, but this would just absolutely put him to an absolute top of the tree. As for the other results that I picked, we haven't actually talked much about NIP yet. I'm actually slightly worried about
Yeah,
like the phase one as well, because NIP have frustratingly scared me with how consistent they
Yeah.
are. I don't understand how they're through to this stage, but I think we're gonna get onto that, aren't we? So
Yeah, I
yeah.
was going to say that in terms of like our picks, while we have mostly unanimously decided the idea that it would just be FaZe and Na'Vi and above NIP and Heroic, those two are probably the most difficult matches to call when it comes to a higher level sort of like competition. Like I think upsets are very possible for both Heroic and NIP. As you mentioned, NIP in particular looking scarily good despite not having their main star player somehow. Like I still don't understand how they're without Device and still doing better than they were with Device. Like it just makes no sense in logical sort of thinking. So I do feel like that is a little bit scary for all of us. It does make more sense that you would pick into Na'Vi and FaZe because they have been the better teams over the last 6 months or so. FaZe especially since they brought Munisi in. What was I saying? Excuse me. Rops. That was my mistake. I've gotten the last major finalist confused with the new major finalist. But no, ever since Rops came in, like FaZe have just looked on point, like by a ridiculous position. So like I do see where logic would dictate that Na'Vi and FaZe would be the teams to win those matches, but I don't think you can count out Heroic and NIP at all, really.
Yeah, man, I'm scared. I fully expect to end up with a silver coin. Let's just put that out there. So the fact that like Broline has hit the ground running with this roster so easily is like, I mean, hell, it puts a lot of the pressure off of Hampus to go in and try and instigate action. Sometimes like Brolin can be that kind of explosive player. It's how he was utilized on Fnatic in previously. Also, Rez has had a pretty good tournament from what we've been able to make of this roster so far. I think the big concern that I have for NIP is that they just don't have they don't really have an AWPer. Like Esatag is trying his hard out, and he is like a super versatile player, but he's not the AWPer you want. Like this is effectively Dupree subbing in for Device when he had an injury type of an
Yeah,
arrangement, but
good call,
Esatag
yeah.
is doing it probably a little worse because there's like less of a groundwork underneath him. So yeah, it's a really weird position to be in because he's supposed to be the second Dane that's learning Swedish on this roster, and now he's just like, hey guys, I'm learning Swedish. Where's my where's Device? So I really hope I like if there was going to be an upset, I actually just wouldn't be mad if NIP made it, but also my pick'ems would be screwed. So
That'd be the case for all of us. I do feel like. Anything to say about the Heroic and IP Na'Vi game? Wow, I'm making mistakes left, right, and center in these last few minutes of the show. Anything to say about that whole thing? Because again, I do feel like it's plausible that Heroic could pull it off. That probably is the most exciting match for me in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the reverse Heroic card where usually we get the best of Heroic in the group stages, the worst in the playoffs. We kind of had the worst not necessarily but a worse version than usual in the groups, and maybe they look better in the playoffs. I don't know. That's all I
Yeah,
got. I just don't think. I just think Navi in this matchup in the past, have always bested it really. So I don't think that again arena and all that kind of stuff still building that experience. But on that, um, sound wise, feels kind of like the tournament. If you were to pull off something, I think if they beat Navi, that's a fair one. Even if they go out in the semis, beating Navi would be a good. Okay, we're on the right lines here, guys. Let's keep at this and just keep getting those lands under our belt. So yeah, there's a lot of potential, and obviously it has been a major of madness. The last major made sense. You look at like every matchup, every stage of it or whatever. Most of the teams that made through, it was only really Copenhagen Flames that were a bit like, wow, okay, but most of it made sense. This one, there's a lot of results, a lot of teams that have made it through, teams that haven't made it through that don't really compute. So there's yeah, again always on the storyline angle for me, but there's maybe a chance that it just carries on being fucking wild and like Navi just like pick into Dust 2 or something crazy. Like, you never know.
Just so long
yeah.
as we don't discount this major like people discount Krakow 2017. Like I don't
Well,
care if your favorite teams aren't in it. Like the
yeah,
major
It
wins
means
the major
something.
win. Like yeah.
Exactly. I completely agree. You got to beat whoever's ahead of you. Yeah, I'm a proponent and belief of that belief as well. And I think I'm also on the ground of that being the most likely upset for me because if there's any point in Heroic's timeline from their sort of upward trend of improvement, I would say this is their best chance yet to beat Navi. I mean, I still don't trust in Heroic in an arena. I still don't think, going by, as I said, what we've seen previously, I still don't think Heroic will beat Navi, especially in an arena in front of a big crowd. They've just not been that sort of team in the past. But with the waist down, as we said, is improving and performing to the best of his career. I think right now, I think Tessis is playing very well as well. If Cadian makes the right decisions that we've seen from him throughout the most of this group stage as well, yeah, I think Heroic have their best chance. But I still believe in Navi. I just think if there's a time for Heroic to win it, it's now. I would say.
What a timeline we could live in, by the way, if Heroic actually won the major. Wouldn't that be crazy?
Fucking
You
hell.
know,
That's something
Nico
none of us
flamed
are
him in the
accounting
group
for.
stage. Nico didn't make it.
Wonderful.
They also used a bug that was premeditated. I don't know, man.
Anyone see that meme, by the way, where someone photoshops the bug and it is just Modesty looking out to an airport after G2 got
Yes.
eliminated? That was
Yes.
fucking hilarious. One of the best memes that's come out of the major so far. But one match that I do want to touch on before we head out, obviously, is the one we disagree on the most, and that is Copenhagen Flames versus Ents. Half of us have Copenhagen Flames, half of us have Ents. So let's start making some arguments for the Ents or Copenhagen Flames side. Why do we feel so strongly about one or the other here? Who was it that picked Flames? I think it was Scriven Trav, right?
I did.
Yeah, those two.
Yeah. Okay. So you two are the T side, and me and Yumi are the CT side. So tell me a bit. Let's put it to task. Why do you two feel so strongly about the Flames?
Well, I suppose a bit of it for me to get this straight out of the gate, and this is a classic, me answer kind of thing. But I do feel that with, like I've said, the wackiness that's been going on, I think this is probably the matchup that maybe Copenhagen Flames keep on overperforming. I think as well, like they have a fair amount of experience against each other, right? With Ents slightly further along and having a lot more consistency when it comes to the online matchups, but a lot of their come up and a lot of their, pushing themselves to those bigger tournaments was in the online games, if that makes sense. Maybe not in this current roster, but certainly in the past. And I don't know. I think there's a little bit of potential, right? Copenhagen Flames very hard to sort of veto into. So I think there is a bit of potential with the upset here. It's definitely for me though. If I were to go back and if I were, I might do the YouTube video and all that kind of stuff for this stage. It's probably the one that I would be umming and ahhing about until the final minute. You know what I mean? And maybe
Yeah.
change back because I'm a bit of a fan of the Ents squad and the Ents boys. I do feel that like top 5 in the world right now for them is again slightly on that overperforming kind of level. But I don't know. I don't know. I just have it's a little bit of a gut feeling type thing for me. I've not been the
Same.
biggest proponent, not been the biggest supporter of Copenhagen Flames. Certainly not on the same level as Trav and Retro on the previous show. I think they're a cool team, they're a fun team, but they definitely have a ceiling. But some pretty good form right now, and I do feel like say they're hard to veto against. And I think hence also a lack of arena experience in some sense. Copenhagen Flames maybe have a little bit more. Um, so we'll see. I think that there is potential for players like Dihar, players like Hades, who for me in the past, especially like Dihar, like on the Sprout days and stuff, really struggled on LAN in front of crowds and things like that. So I don't know that he's really had a chance to overcome that. And then Hades is still very young, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to perform. So I think that they could crumble. I think that Ents could crumble it.
Yeah, I mean, the same can be said of Spinks, right? Like, I mean, I love Spinks. I think he's going to be. I think he's that sort of attitude of player that would not be too phased by the arena. But still, I think I agree that there's a possibility of that. The main reason I picked Copenhagen Flames, and actually, even though my Diamond Dream is dead, I would have probably still picked Copenhagen Flames. Obviously, there's an argument to be said that I'd maybe go a bit safer if I could still get Diamond, because now it doesn't really matter as much. Sure, Gold is nice, but whatever. Yeah, I still think I would have picked Copenhagen Flames purely because of the factor of them knowing that they've got no pressure on them now, and Ents are the favourites. I think it's almost certain that Ents will be considered the favourites by nearly everyone. But Ents and Copenhagen Flames, when it comes to arena crowd experience, are sort of still at the same level. Even though Ents are the huge favourites, they don't have neither of them have arena experience. Like, excuse me, usually Snappy, like you'd say, oh, he's like a huge, very wise head on this team, but like realistically, he hasn't had much, huge amount of arena experience anyway. Like, even though he's so. Yeah, for me, I think if there's an upset to be had, I think it could be Spirit. I mean, genuinely, they could beat Fury, I think, considering what we've seen. But I still think Fury's huge arena experience and team experience would get them through against Spirit in this scenario. And the same sort of logic for me applies to this one. I think Ents could get a bit of stage fright, whereas Copenhagen Flames, they've made their run. They're happy with where they are. Pressure's off. They're the underdog. And they'll just see what happens. And I think they could make it happen.
I mean, my angle in picking Ents over Copenhagen Flames is mostly down to the fact that they're the ones that have that Pro League result, right? And it's something I mentioned in the last show is that they're still riding on the coattails of that and still being a powerful team as a result. And having that performance in that event, whereas Copenhagen Flames didn't even participate in that, still having a top 5 position in the world, I don't think that's as overrated as maybe Scriv might have implied, I'll be honest. Closer to 10th place probably is a bit more of an appropriate position for me, and I feel like as the tournament start to bleed over, then they'll start to see them drop into a much more appropriate position. But for now, they are a top 5 team in the world, and for me, I think that's just about enough to edge Copenhagen Flames, because the arguments you could have in terms of that like whole lack of arena experience cuts both ways. Both teams are going to struggle with that composure element, and I feel like the Ents have demonstrated more so than Copenhagen Flames so far that they can deal with that, because they've gone deeper. They had a better run in the Legend stage. They obviously have previous experience. Their year has been very good so far. So for me, like, I feel like it's more a case of history. Like, you could talk about the intangibles about playing without pressure, but you could argue the same thing for Ents, because do you really think Ents would have expected to make it this far? I don't think a lot of people actually had them down as being or not as one of the main teams that you would have expected to make it through the Legends stage for me. So I'm looking at that and I'm thinking that they've just had the much more competent build up to this position for me.
Yeah, and I think I'd actually sort of counter argument that I think Snappy has more than enough LAN experience. Like, it is, albeit mainly at sort of like the DreamHack Open sort of level, but back when DreamHack were running those tournaments pretty regularly and had them in front of crowds, but that's not really an arena. So I get where you're coming from in that respect. There's a lot more pressure on. Expectations are high. I think in all those events that he competed at as well, he wouldn't have been pitted as the favorite to win those events. And I don't think they did. So it's I think expectation is certainly there on Ents. I would have actually argued that a lot of teams or a lot of people would have put Ents, FaZe, G2 all kind of in the same camp. Like, based on the trajectory that they're headed, that they just felt inevitable that they'd end up at the playoffs. But yeah, I think I just heckin' love Spinks, so I can't really find another argument there. Like, I love the way that this guy's developed. He's the only person that under Snappy's leadership has actually stayed with that old contact squad once upon a time. Like, we saw Rigon do some cool shit with B&E. That's cool, but it clearly didn't have the, I don't know, the je ne sais quoi that Snappy really required on this team. So yeah, I love just that they have like a progress arc for this pairing, I suppose. And now we have another fairly competitive international rosters, when international rosters were never really seen as feasible at like a competitive level.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really do love this Ents team. Like, I don't get me wrong. Just because I picked against them doesn't mean I dislike what
Yeah,
they're
same.
about. I think I just love this. It's one of the my most favorite teams to watch. Maybe I've got a little bit of something in the back of my mind saying, I picked Ents 3-0 and you failed me, and I don't want you to go any further. But because like, the thing that made me sad about Ents is they actually beat FaZe in the BO1, and that's what I wanted from them. And I thought to myself, okay, now my 3-0 pick is very durable, and then they just have to play against Bloody Spirit or whatever it was. Like, they just got owned by like whatever. It happens. But yeah, I honestly, I think Ents, while they are the favourites, I think I'm on board with what Michael's saying. I think it's going to be a very close one, but both of them are at that level of, uncertainty in arenas for sure.
Yeah, I will say that match is the most uncertain of them all, because it really is the one that could cut both ways. So
I mean, you don't think Furia Spirit is like the exact same thing?
that is also a good
yeah.
shout. I mean, we did also have some discrepancies on that one, but again, it's very similar sort of tale. I mentioned earlier that I don't know if Spirit's run was as legit thanks to the format, and I have a lot more faith in Furia based on what they've been able to do. Was it only Yumi that picked Spirit over Furia?
Even though I actually have like a tweet, I'm pretty sure that's like responding to someone saying I think Fury is going to win the major. Like, I made a challenge to a friend of mine that like, oh, we'd have to pick a dark horse that were, just like, who do you think is going to win the major, but that's not like one of the top 3 teams or top 5 teams. And I was like, yeah. Fuck it, Furia. I liked Safe on his old team, and it feels like a good fit, I guess. And I think K Serato is more than skilled enough to win it, but I need points, man. I need points in my pick'em. So as much as I believe that
You
somewhere
lose the
in my
diamond
heart,
coin,
it's
you go
just
a bit
not
crazy,
enough.
It seems. Well, regardless
Will
of
it not
who,
happen again?
yeah, well, hopefully next major we can all get diamonds, but only right now Scriv is in the running for a diamond himself. So best of luck to you in this playoff stage, because given how wild this major has been, you're going to have to need it, I think. For myself, Yumi,
I
and
hope you
Trav.
lose and join us in the dirt.
I'll take you down with us, please. If you're going down, I'm taking everybody with me.
Well, we will be bringing updates as to how the Pick'ems did go in our final show, the Pick'em Post Show, which will be immediately following the Grand Finals on Sunday. So make sure you're following the Twitch page and the YouTube page for all that action, because we will be back for that. But for today, we are all done. The show is over. The Legend stage has been broken down, and all we have to do is sit back and try and enjoy the very stressful ride that will be the Champion stage. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show today, especially Yumi for filling in semi-last minute as well. I'll go clockwise around the table, and I'll let you guys plug your
Way to
shit.
remind me I'm a replacement.
Yeah, you might not be come Sunday, but once again, clockwise around the table, plug your shit, and let people know what's going on.
All right, yeah, that's me.
you.
Hey, at Yumi TV on Twitter, and that's actually all I got going on. Yeah, screw it.
All right.
At TravCS on Twitter, yeah, I'll be sure to tweet about everything going on in the playoffs. Appreciate all the support. Past 2,000 followers recently. I'm very proud of myself. In a weird way, it's only followers. Who cares? Squiv, go next.
GG, go next. Yeah.
Oh god, that was a real up and down kind of part of the back. But yeah, I'd Scrivcast on everything really. YouTube is fairly often. Don't really use my Twitch, but you can follow it if you like. I tweet sometimes, so yeah. Even on Instagram if you want to see pictures of me. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, awesome. Well, once again, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I will definitely be asking you all back for the Sunday show if you can make it, but we'll see who's going to turn up there on the Pick and Post show for the Grand Finals. But until that point, I'll bid you all adieu on behalf of myself, the Eternal J, my panelists, and everyone else that has been watching. Thank you so much for watching and for listening, and we'll see you back here on Sunday to conclude the PGL Antwerp Major.